My mother called me family disgrace at Thanksgiving. She didn't know I was buying her mortgage with. If the person you loved most, the one who should have supported you, called you a family disgrace at a holiday dinner, what if, in that moment of humiliation, you realized you had the power to change everything? Hey, my name is Ruth Martin. It's funny how one sentence, one careless comment, can change everything. Thanksgiving was supposed to be a time for family. At least, that's what I told myself every year as I went through the motions of preparing the meal, setting the table, and putting on my best face for relatives I barely saw. My mother, though, always found a way to make the holiday feel more like a battlefield than a celebration. It was her favorite time of year to critique me, to remind me of all the things I wasn't. I had learned to tune it out, to laugh along with the rest of the family as she made snide remarks about my career, my choices, even my appearance. But this year, it was different. This year, I couldn't ignore it. I had been working so hard to make a name for myself, to carve out a space in a world that seemed determined to push me aside. I had started my own business, built it from the ground up, and watched it begin to thrive. It wasn't much yet, but it was mine. I had worked through countless sleepless nights, put everything on the line, and fought for every ounce of success I had earned. But it still wasn't enough. I was sitting at the dinner table, my eyes darting between my relatives, the smell of turkey and stuffing thick in the air, when it happened. My mother, with her sharp eyes and piercing voice, looked at me across the table and said, "You know, Ruth, you're a family disgrace. You've always been so busy with your little business that you forget about what really matters. Your family." The words hung in the air like a physical blow to my chest. It wasn't the first time she had humiliated me, but something about it felt different this time. Maybe it was the years of pretending it didn't hurt, of putting on the brave face for everyone else. Maybe it was the constant feeling that no matter what I did, it would never be enough for her. But this time, it cut deeper. This time, it wasn't just her words. It was the tone, the look in her eyes, like I had failed her in some way, like I was less than because I had chosen a different path. I could feel my heart racing as I looked around the table. My family sat there in stunned silence, not one of them stepping in to defend me, not one of them offering any support. It was as if my mother's words had become the law, and no one dared challenge them. I wanted to stand up, to scream, to say something, anything that would take the sting out of the moment, but I couldn't. All I could do was sit there, quietly, my hands gripping the edge of the table, my face flushed with embarrassment. "Ruth, are you even listening?" My mother's voice broke through my thoughts. "You've spent so much time chasing your little dreams that you've lost sight of the things that truly matter. Family is what matters." Her words felt like daggers. I could feel my chest tightening, the familiar ache of years of buried resentment rising within me. But I didn't say anything. I could in single quotes T. Instead, I pushed my food around my plate, trying to ignore the way my family's eyes burned into me. I wanted to disappear, to sink into the ground and never have to deal with this again. But somewhere in the back of my mind, a thought began to form, a thought I wasn't ready to face. I had spent my whole life living in my family's shadow, living under the weight of their expectations and judgments. I had worked my entire life to make them proud, to be accepted, to prove that I wasn't just a disappointment. And yet, it never seemed to be enough. Was it time to stop trying? I didn't know how to answer that question then. But I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't keep living this way. I couldn't keep letting her words define me. I couldn't keep sacrificing myself for a family who couldn't see me, couldn't appreciate what I was doing. As I sat there, trying to hold it together, a strange sense of clarity washed over me. For the first time in my life, I realized that maybe, just maybe, the problem wasn't me. Maybe the problem was that I had spent my entire life looking for their approval, waiting for them to love me in a way that I had never learned to love myself. The truth was, I didn't need their approval. Not anymore. I had spent so long chasing something I would never get, validation from people who could never understand me. And that was the moment when everything shifted. I wasn't going to let this humiliation define me. The days after that Thanksgiving dinner were a blur. I couldn't stop replaying my mother's words in my head, the sting of them still fresh on my mind. I tried to go about my daily routine, my business, my work, but everything felt different. There was an ache in my chest, a familiar pain. I had buried for so long that I couldn't ignore it anymore. It was the constant sense of inadequacy I had been carrying for as long as I could remember. I had spent my life trying to prove myself, trying to be the person my family wanted me to be, hoping that someday they would see me for who I truly was. But the truth was, I had never felt like I was enough for them. No matter how much I achieved, no matter how hard I worked, it was never enough. My mother had always been the hardest to please, her critical words cutting deeper than anyone else's. I remembered the way she used to criticize me growing up, how she would point out every little mistake, every misstep. I couldn't do anything right in her eyes. When I was a child, I would try to get good grades, hoping it would make her proud, but it never seemed to matter. If I got an A on a test, she would say, "Why didn't you get an A+?" If I cleaned the house, she would nitpick every corner I missed. There was always something wrong, always something I could have done better. As I grew older, I learned to hide my feelings, to keep quiet and play the part of the perfect daughter, even though it was tearing me apart on the inside. Every time I thought I had done enough, every time I tried to prove my worth, the bar would be raised higher. It became a never-ending cycle, and no matter what I did, I couldn't escape it. But I also started to realize that it wasn't just her. The rest of the family played their part too. They never seemed to understand me, my siblings, all with their own lives and successes, had their own paths to follow. But no one ever thought to check on me. No one saw the struggle behind my quiet determination, the sleepless nights building my business, the sacrifices I made to keep everything afloat. They all assumed I was fine, that I was strong enough to handle everything. But I wasn't. I was exhausted. I had been carrying the weight of their expectations, their judgments, for so long that I had forgotten who I was. I had forgotten what it meant to be seen for who I truly was. The business I had started, the life I had built, it wasn't for me. It was to prove that I wasn't the family disgrace they'd always made me feel like. I was working for their approval, even though I had never been able to earn it. But when my mother called me a disgrace at Thanksgiving, it was like a floodgate opened. All of those hidden betrayals, the ones I had quietly accepted as part of my life, came rushing to the surface. I realized how much I had sacrificed for their approval, how much of myself I had lost in the process, and I hated myself for it. But more than that, I hated how little I had ever stood up for myself. I had let them make me feel small, insignificant. For so long, I had let their criticisms define me, and in doing so, I had lost sight of who I really was. The betrayal wasn't just from my mother, it was from me, too. I had allowed myself to be the person they wanted me to be, not the person I wanted to be. I had spent so many years running on autopilot, trying to keep up with their expectations, that I had forgotten to ask myself what I needed, what I wanted. As I sat alone in my apartment that evening, the weight of everything finally hit me. My mother's words echoed in my ears, but instead of the pain I had always felt, there was something else, something powerful rising within me. I wasn't going to let her let anyone define who I was anymore. I had spent my life trying to prove myself to people who would never see me. But it wasn't about them anymore. It was about me. I wasn't going to keep hiding my worth behind the walls of my family's expectations. I wasn't going to keep pretending I was fine when I wasn't. It was time for me to take control of my life, to stop being the invisible one in the room, the one always in the background. I was going to show them, show everyone, that I was enough, with or without their approval. The truth was, I had spent far too much of my life being ashamed of who I was. But now, I was done with that. I was going to confront the hidden wounds, the ones I had buried for so long, and take control of my own story. The decision to take control didn't happen overnight. It didn't come in a single moment of clarity or some grand realization. It came slowly, like the first light of dawn creeping through the dark, transforming everything it touched. For weeks after Thanksgiving, I moved through my life in a fog. I worked, I handled the business, I smiled at my friends. But inside, I was falling apart. The humiliation from my mother's words continued to eat at me, and the more I thought about it, the more I realized that the only thing keeping me tethered to that pain was my constant need for their approval. I was holding onto something that wasn't even real, this idea that if I just tried harder, if I proved myself more, I would finally be good enough. But what if the truth was that I was enough all along? It wasn't easy to break free from the way I'd been conditioned. After all, this was my family, the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. I couldn't simply flip a switch and expect to feel nothing or let go of the need for their validation. But I was tired, so tired. Tired of working harder than anyone else just to be seen. Tired of bending myself into someone else's idea of who I was supposed to be. One night, after another exhausting day spent dealing with my business and fending off calls from family members who thought I was too sensitive to understand their comments, I finally looked in the mirror and asked myself, why am I doing this? Why am I continuing to let them control my happiness? I didn't have the answers right away, but I did know that something needed to change. I could no longer be the quiet, compliant daughter, sister, and business owner who just took everything and kept it together. I had been doing it for so long that it had become a reflex, but now I understood that my role in my family, my role in the world didn't have to be one of invisibility. I had worked hard to build my own business. It wasn't just a job. It was the culmination of my own strength, my own vision, and yet I had been letting it all be overshadowed by the need to prove my worth to the same people who will. They never truly see it. The next morning, I sat at my kitchen table, a cup of coffee in hand, my laptop open in front of me. I knew it was time to do something that terrified me, something I had avoided for too long. It was time to confront my family, to confront the wounds I had hidden from them and from myself. I started drafting an email, one that would send ripples through my family. I had spent so long hiding my success, downplaying my accomplishments, that now it was time to share the truth. I was done with silence. The email wasn't a letter of anger. It wasn't about blaming anyone. It was about stating the facts, what I had achieved, how far I had come, and how I had always been there for my family. Despite how they had treated me, it was time they knew the truth. Time they understood that I had been quietly building my own life while they continued to hold onto their outdated expectations. As I clicked send, I felt a strange calm wash over me. There was no turning back now. I had taken the first step toward reclaiming my power. I wasn't asking for anyone's approval anymore. I was simply telling them the truth. But as I leaned back in my chair, I couldn't ignore the familiar fear gnawing at the edges of my mind. What if they didn't care? What if this only pushed them further away? What if they rejected me completely? I had spent so much of my life hoping they would accept me, hoping that one day I would be good enough for them. But I knew now that I couldn't live my life in fear of their rejection. I couldn't continue to define myself by their standards. If I did, I would be trapped forever, stuck in a cycle of proving myself to people who would never truly see me. It was time to stop seeking their approval and start seeking my own. I didn't need them to validate my worth. I was doing it for myself now. The relief I felt was unlike anything I had experienced before. For the first time, I wasn't afraid. I wasn't afraid of their judgment. I wasn't afraid of their criticism. And most of all, I wasn't afraid of being myself anymore. This was my life. It was time to start living it for me. It wasn't enough to simply confront my family with the truth. I wasn't done yet. I had taken the first step, yes, but there was so much more to do. The email had been sent, and the seed had been planted. But now, I needed to follow through. Now, I had to decide what came next. What would my life look like if I actually stood by my words? I had spent my life being the person everyone else wanted me to be: quiet, accommodating, the dutiful daughter who stayed in the background. But now I had to carve out a new path, and that path wasn't just about gaining their approval. It was about reclaiming the parts of me I had given away so freely for so long. As I reflected on what I wanted, the more I realized it wasn't revenge in the traditional sense. It wasn't about making them pay for their words or for their indifference. It was about making them see me, finally making them understand that I had power, that I was someone who didn't need their validation to succeed. I had already been building my own future in the shadows, but now I was going to bring it into the light. The idea began to take shape slowly at first, almost like a quiet whisper in the back of my mind. What if I could turn this whole situation around? What if I could use their own assumptions against them? I had spent too many years hiding my success, letting my family think I was just drifting through life. But what if I could show them that I wasn't drifting? What if I could use my business to gain the control I'd always wanted? I took a deep breath. Standing up from my desk, the idea felt like a fire building inside of me, filling the empty spaces I hadn't even known were there. It wasn't enough to simply stand up to them. I needed to take action. I began planning, making notes, drawing connections, calculating the steps I needed to take to turn the table completely. The first part of the plan was to leverage my business to make myself financially independent, not just for my own sake, but to prove that I didn't need their approval. I would no longer be the family disgrace. I would be the woman who took control of her life and her success. Then came the harder part: my family. I had always given them my everything, always hoped for their approval. Now, I had to stop doing that. It wasn't about confronting them with a grand gesture or making them regret their words. It was about showing them that I didn't need them to define my worth. As the days passed, I worked diligently on both my business and my plan. I reached out to some of the most influential people in my industry, people who had seen the potential in me long before my family ever did. I wasn't going to sit in the background any longer. I was going to build something that couldn't be ignored, something that would finally force my family to see me. I didn't need their validation, but I would force them to acknowledge the success I had created. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that the plan had to involve more than just success. It had to be about control. It had to be about taking what was mine and making sure no one could take it from me again. I pulled out my laptop and began working on the next steps: securing new clients, expanding my product lines, building a network that would make my family's business look like a shadow compared to what I had already accomplished. I wasn't just going to succeed. I was going to thrive in a way they could never have imagined. I was going to do what they had always told me was impossible. The idea of achieving all of this felt strange, exhilarating, and terrifying all at once. But what was scarier than living in the shadow of my family's expectations? What was scarier than continuing to let their criticisms define me? I had spent so much of my life feeling small, invisible, like I would never be enough. But now I had the power to change that. The plan was simple: show them that I could do it without them. Show them that I was more than just a family member. They would have to reckon with the woman I was becoming. I could feel the shift in me already. The anger, the hurt, the humiliation, it was all still there, but it was transforming. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about taking my life back. The plan was in motion, and there was no turning back now. The day had arrived. I had spent weeks preparing for this moment, each detail carefully calculated, each move planned with precision. I wasn't just confronting my family. I was confronting everything I had allowed to hold me back for so long. The years of humiliation, the self-doubt, the need for validation, it all culminated in this moment. It wasn't just about proving something to my family. It was about proving it to myself. I wasn't the quiet, unnoticed woman I had been. I wasn't the one who waited for someone else to give me permission to succeed. I had already built something for myself, something they had ignored, dismissed, and belittled. But now I was ready to show them, and I wasn't going to be subtle about it. I called a family meeting. Everyone would be there: my parents, my siblings, the extended family. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but this was the only way to do it. I wasn't going to let them think they could continue treating me like I was nothing. I wasn't going to let them continue using their opinions to shape my life. As I stood in front of them, the table was full, everyone chatting quietly as usual. I knew they hadn't expected anything to change. They had expected me to show up, to take the insults in stride, as I always had. But this time, I wasn't just showing up. I was stepping into the room, fully present, ready to claim my place. "Excuse me," I said, my voice cutting through the noise. It felt strange, almost foreign, to speak with such authority in a room where I had always been the background character. But as I looked at their faces, my mother, my father, my siblings, all I could feel was calm. It was time to make my presence known. "I have something to say," I continued, my voice steady, my eyes focused on my mother. I could see the look in her eyes, the defensive posture already taking shape. I wasn't intimidated. I've spent my entire life trying to meet your expectations, trying to earn your approval, I said, keeping my voice even. But I'm done. I'm done being the family disappointment. I'm done being the one you can talk down to, the one who never gets the credit, the one who's always too much, or not enough. My mother shifted uncomfortably in her seat. She opened her mouth to speak, but I held up a hand, silencing her. You called me a disgrace at Thanksgiving, I said, and I could see the flash of guilt in her eyes, but you don't know the half of it. I took a deep breath, standing taller, grounding myself. I've been building something for myself. I've been running a business, making deals, securing my future, and I don't need your approval to know that I'm capable. But the truth is, I've been hiding it from you all. I've been hiding it from all of you. I paused, letting that sink in. They didn't know, not even my own family. They had all assumed I was still the quiet, unsure woman they thought I was. They hadn't bothered to look beyond the surface, but now they were going to see me. You've all underestimated me, I continued, and that ends today, not because I want revenge, but because I want you to see me for who I am, not for the daughter you want me to be, not for the sister you think I should be, but for the woman I've become. My heart raced as I pulled out my laptop and opened it to the documents I had prepared. I'm buying my mother's mortgage, I said simply, laying the documents out on the table, and I'm taking over the business. I've been running it quietly in the background for years. Now, I'm taking control. There was a stunned silence. My mother looked between me and the papers, her face slowly turning pale as she processed what I had just said. You, what? She stammered. I've already started the process. I've been buying up shares of the company, and I'm making sure I have a majority stake. You can no longer dismiss me. You can't hide behind your criticisms anymore. I felt the weight of the words settle between us, and for the first time, I felt a strange calm wash over me. The power I had been chasing for so long was finally mine, not because I had taken it from them, but because I had finally taken it from myself. I had stopped hiding. I turned to my father, who had been silent this entire time. You've always told me to be patient, to wait for my moment. Well, this is my moment, and I'm done waiting. The room was thick with tension, the silence almost unbearable, but I wasn't going to apologize. I wasn't going to retreat. I wasn't the same woman who had walked into this room hours ago. I had reclaimed myself, and no one could take that away from me. Maybe you'll never understand why I've done this, I said softly, looking at my mother. But I'm doing it for me. For once, I'm doing something for myself. With that, I stood up, gathered my things, and turned to leave. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their validation. I had finally taken control. The Thanksgiving dinner I once dreaded now became the catalyst for everything I had been silently building. My mother's words, calling me a family disgrace, had been the final straw. This time, I wasn't staying silent. In front of the family, I stood up and said, I'm done seeking your approval. I've been quietly running my business, and I don't need your validation anymore. You've underestimated me for too long. I didn't need to say more. I showed them the documents. I'm buying the mortgage. I'm taking control of the company, I said firmly, watching their shocked faces as they processed the news. My mother stared, speechless, while my father shifted uncomfortably. I turned to them and said softly, I'm doing this for me, no one else. For the first time, I felt the power of my own voice, no longer afraid, no longer hiding. I wasn't just confronting my family. I was finally confronting myself. And when I walked out of that room, I knew something had shifted. I had taken back my power, and I was never going to let it go.